Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dr. Ken Knight at the Paragon Counselor. And today I wanted to make a short video about the mechanics of willpower, right? Anytime that there's something that you want to do that you just can't get done, it's always, oh, I'm not motivated, or I'm not disciplined enough, or I don't have the willpower, I don't have the energy to make it happen, right? So we're going to cover a little bit of the anatomy of that, right? So when you look at what willpower is, we're looking at three pieces that make up the equation of whether or not a behavior happens or not. To steal from Dr. BJ Fogg, he's got a behavior model called B equals MAT, B MAT. Behavior is equal to the combination of motivation, ability, and trigger, okay? And it's relatively self-explanatory, but motivation is how badly you want to do something, okay? Ability is how able you are to do it, a little circular reasoning there. And trigger is how difficult is the action to undertake or resist, okay? And so the higher the motivation and ability and the lower the trigger, the easier it is to perform the action. Right? So when we call something discipline, or we call it willpower, or we call it motivation, what we're really saying is, what is the ratio of my desire and ability to achieve or abstain from a thing relative to the difficulty of doing this thing in the context of all of my other stressors, responsibilities, or problems, okay? And so we can break it down by these pieces. And so if you want to understand your willpower, so to speak, you have to understand that it's a resource management game, okay? You have to consider your internal chemistry, and you have to consider the support or detriment of your environmental factors, and you have to consider the context of everything else you're doing and your energy level, right? So if you want to improve your willpower or the functional effects of that, then you have to increase your motivation and ability and reduce the trigger wherever possible, okay? The motivation piece, you could also say this is your anticipation of the strength of reward, right? So if you are not really believing that you're going to get a great or expedient result out of something, your desire to do it drops, okay? I want to go to the gym. Well, one workout is not going to get you ready for the beach, so maybe your motivation or your anticipation or perception of perceived reward is going to be low. Your ability is probably there. You know how to, unless it's your first time exercising, you probably know how to pick yourself up and go do the thing. Now, there's always a question of efficiency or getting more advanced, but as far as the act of getting up to go do the movement, you know what you're doing. The trigger may be any number of things, right? In addition to the motivation being low, of, oh, I really don't see this one act of will really turning things over to my desired outcome, and I'm tired, or it's far away, I have to drive, or I just worked all day, or the kids are screaming, or I'm sick, or I didn't get enough sleep, or maybe I've got some limiting beliefs. Maybe I've been eating like trash and I don't feel well, whatever the case may be. The trigger is higher than your spare motivation and ability to overcome that trigger, okay? So going through each part of this, one way that you can make it easier to do what you need to do is try to only commit to things when possible that have a high perception or high anticipation of adequate reward, okay? Is what you're doing a worthwhile goal? A lot of people have great ideas that they don't really want that much, but maybe you said you need to do it, or maybe you feel committed to it, or maybe you feel like the failure to execute this thing is going to say something bad about you. So really just evaluate whether or not you really want this thing bad enough. And there's no shame in evaluating a circumstance and going, you know what, I'm aware that this could be good for me, but I don't want it bad enough to go through the problems and drain myself enough to make it happen. And the moment you liberate yourself of wanting to engage in a thing that you don't want badly enough to suffer for, that gives you back all of your energy to throw towards what's more important. So the first thing is, select behaviors when possible that increase your motivation to execute them. Okay. Ability is a bit of a difficult one, so we're going to come back to that one. Trigger. This this is probably the thing that you can control in the short term without reconditioning yourself. Okay. If a task seems too big to say yes to or too big to say no to, try snapping it apart into a bunch of smaller pieces. And eventually, that elephant will be broken down into pieces small enough that you can consume. Okay? So there could just be an organizational process of, instead of looking at this giant, difficult, or long term trigger, you might go, okay, what is a slice of that I can take today? What parts of this hurt me the least as far as exhaustion, difficulty, frustration? Maybe I could start on those. Okay, so break it down into smaller chunks. Be organized, have systems. We'll have videos on that later. So that does circle us back to, you've got the motivation, if possible, and hopefully so. Try to reduce the strength of the trigger through breaking it down or sequencing or selection. And then we've got the ability. And how do you increase your ability to overcome the difficulty of triggers to make actions happen with the willpower you possess? Okay. This one has no shortcut. What I would tell you first is to try and diminish things that are holding back your existing capabilities as they would currently stand if you weren't burdened. So if you take care of yourself using basic protocols, get enough rest, eat the right kind of food, surround yourself with adaptive mentality and adaptive feedback, control your friendships, watch what kind of media you're taking in, make sure you are managing your anxiety and depression states so that you're in an optimal state with sufficient emotional resources to commit to this thing. Now, in the future, you're going to have to cultivate practices that enhance the efficiency of your prefrontal cortex and make you able to execute more with less resources or with fewer resources. And that's going to be an entire section of videos and of cultivated skill sets. But if you must do something right now and you really can't wait the 3 to 6 months, the 50,000 reps to habituate to new capabilities or just upgrade your hardware, then I would go after, sequence, try to go after things that I am motivated to do, all right? And I would also try and arrange and organize and attack it from the least difficult angles possible. And in the meantime, I would look at my machinery, my emotional state, my physical state, and I would try to take the utmost care of myself so that I am in best performance that I can be before I go and attack these high trigger items. Okay, so we've got behavior as motivation, ability, and trigger. You use your motivation to try and select behaviors that you have an abundance of desire and drive to do. You cultivate practices which enhance your abilities over time, but you also maintain your machinery in the present moment. And then triggers, you try and organize, sequence, and strategize to attack them in the easiest ways that are feasible. Okay. Now, if we get a little bit more to the mechanics of willpower, right, we're talking reward chemicals, but we're all across the three systems. We've got the neurotransmitters, we've got the endocrine system, we've got the immune system. We've also got glucose reserves in the front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, that have to become the upstream fuel that becomes adenosine triphosphate that gets turned into the battery that gets turned into the electrical sparks that form your thoughts. So bear in mind when you've really expended yourself and you haven't recharged your rest, you haven't reset for the day, then what's going to happen is you've exhausted those purely mechanical resources in addition to the reward chemicals. So bear that in mind. We're going to cover this in future videos, but pay particular attention to the A section of behaviors, motivation, ability, and trigger, because that's going to be the one that's the most complex. And we're going to cover, beyond the videos we put out so far of just maintaining your personal health and capabilities, we're going to teach you to cultivate practices which myelinate the specific neural pathways in your brain that cultivate mental toughness, that cultivate anti-fragility, and that cultivate a drive to attack difficult trigger items. So stay tuned for that in future videos, and thank you for your time.